Is the Honourable Member for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I wanted to rise today and offer, I guess, a few thoughts around this issue and this bill, because I think actually it is a matter of public interest, and in fact I would suggest great public interest, given the proposal and changes of governance and structure that are at the heart of this bill. So I did my master's in public administration in 2000, and before that I hadn't actually worked in government. And so I will tell you that the course called Government Structure and Organization was a touch dry. It was held in the Life Sciences Center, sort of early afternoon after lunch in one of those bunker rooms with no windows. And Dr. Bafkus was passionate about the structure of government and about what signals had changed through this throne speech and through that throne speech. And, you know, kind of all I remember is the fight to stay awake as he, you know, flashed organizational charts up to explain what happened in the 1974 speech from the throne that was really interesting about how government departments were structured. And so, you know, it was a course that without some application was sort of hard to appreciate. And after that, when I worked for the federal government and then for the provincial government, in fact, I came to understand that government structure and organization is actually really important. It's actually at the heart of how government does business. It signals the intent of government. People name departments certain names. People change governments, and we have new names of departments. It is actually an important issue to consider. And I actually think it's even more important to consider when we're talking about the role of arm's length organizations. So, you know, so those are agency boards, commissions, and crown corporations. Because in that way, we've actually said they're not quite aligned departments. So line departments are all kind of managed the same way. They have the same rules. They have the same financial administration, no matter what the issue is. Whereas agency boards and commissions tend to be quite diverse in their structure and their organization. But we want these organizations as arm's length organizations for a few reasons. So we still feel that government still feels and signals that there is a public good, there's a public question at heart, that government has some role in responding to and in creating and supporting in a jurisdiction, so in Nova Scotia. However, there's also a sense that this is not necessarily a role for government. So, and I think the art gallery is actually a great example. So of course, we in Nova Scotia want a place to house our provincial art, to highlight past, present, and future artists, to bring in exhibits from around the world, and really to support people engaged in the ideas around art. So we know that's a public good, that's a public issue, that's something that we value in this province. At the same time, and I don't know around the founding of the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, but I bet you that it would not have been founded by a private organization. So it's true, we have lots of private art galleries in Nova Scotia, and they too play a role, but they don't play the public good role. So they don't do special programs that engage young people. They don't do, you know, during the pandemic, the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia had amazing online programs available for classes and for families who were at home with young people. You know, we have a Yarmouth extension of the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia. So, you know, the Art Gallery as a provincial institution is more than a private art gallery. And I think that that's really important. So, but that's one of the reasons why we have arm's length organizations. We know something needs to happen in a certain sector, on a certain issue. We know there's a public interest in it, and we're pretty sure that probably other sectors, whether they're not-for-profit or private, are not going to be able to create the structure and the program, the outcomes, really, that we're looking for. We also establish arm's length organizations because, in fact, we don't want them to become part of government. We want them to bring a diversity of expertise and experience and approach, and I'll have more to say to this when we talk about Invest Nova Scotia. We want diverse perspectives. We want people who are connected to the emergent areas of different sectors, and we want to put them in positions of decision making. We also want to like enhance citizen engagement and participation. I think the art gallery again is a great example of that. We have people who come to the board of the Nova Scotia Art Gallery who bring their expertise and contribute their time because they're committed to art in Nova Scotia. So I think those are some of the sort of the first issues that we need to think about because we have a number of pieces before the House this session where government is proposing that a board or, well, in most cases, a board, an independent board, be replaced, and ministers are getting corporations all over the place. So, like, I think if you get through the session and you don't get a corporation, you're going to have to, like, ask yourself, why didn't I get a corporation? In one case it's an art gallery, and minister, respectfully, I think maybe you like won the tournament to get the art gallery. But I think this is a really disturbing trend, and as has been outlined time and time again, we got out of the business of politicizing private sector development. We got out of the business of politicizing art and culture. And we did that because we wanted governments that weren't based on nepotism and connections, and that, every time the government changed, the person in charge of a certain institution changed radically. We wanted an independent, nonpartisan, professional public service, and that includes arm's length organizations. So I think there's much to be concerned about. I'm just going to flip through my notes. And I also think it's important to think about the fact that through the 1970s and 80s, as arm's length organizations were developed in government, that also board governance and specialization was developed. So also, we have all spent lots of time. If you've been on a board, you probably have had a board strategic planning session. You might be on a board where people will say it's a policy board, or it's a board, governed by Robert's rules, or it's this or it's that, because we've actually thought about how to do this kind of collective work well, and the collective work of bringing together diverse interests, diverse perspectives, diverse expertise in a board that then serves an organization. And so I think it's also important to realize that I don't think that one person does that. And, often it's super valuable to have someone from the public service on the board of an organization, but they're not the only perspective that's needed. And they're not going to be able to connect to the emergent issues that are happening in various sectors. As I was perusing some of the background material that the library has been providing for me in response to my various questions about arm's length organizations, I was also struck by the fact that in this process, in this session, we're actually not getting any information about these reviews and what's being proposed. So, I will table some documents at a later date, but there's actually a whole plethora of information about how you do a review of an arm's length organization within government. So people don't just politicize them and do it and then announce the results. So it's hard on this side. I have no idea what happened during any of the reviews that are being announced. We saw notes and mandate letters, and I'm just at the risk, I'm tabling a 2-page document, it's not a prop. And then there was a 2-page document released that explained kind of what was happening with a number of the agency boards and commissions. That is not a process. So let me find some of the information I have about sunsetting reviews. So there was actually a whole process established in the 1970s and 80s in many jurisdictions in the US and Canada, including Ontario, where there was actually sunset legislation put in place to guide the ongoing review of arm's length organizations. Because that's a great idea, right? We absolutely want government to think about what are you doing, how are you doing it, are we doing it the right way? But this was actually, public processes that included stakeholder engagement and included, in-depth agency evaluations that was shared with the public, so people knew what was going on. And one of the things the authors here say is that, the most important part of the whole sunset concept is the provision for review and evaluation. So to make sure that, in fact, what you're doing with an arm's length organization is serving the public interest, continues to serve the public interest. And program review and evaluation by the legislature is a precondition in all sunset legislation for the reenactment of a program, legislation, agency, or tax expenditure. Most sunset laws provided some preliminary evaluation to be performed by the agency or program under evaluation. That would be given to a legislative committee, which would make the final recommendation. And some of the questions that that the sunset reviews would include were, has the agency permitted qualified applicants to serve the public? Which is a particularly relevant, perhaps, question for the question of the art gallery. Has the agency operated in the public interest? Has the agency encouraged participation by the public in making its rules and decisions, as opposed to participation solely by the persons, in this case, that it regulates or works with? Is there a formal public complaints process? In Florida, some of the questions were around, is there another less restrictive approach to implementing this government objective? And so there were sunset reviews, like I said, in Canada, in the US, in Australia as well. And Peter O'Coin, who's a professor of public administration that many of you might know, and I'm just looking through my notes, wrote in 2007 specifically around Crown corporations in an article entitled Public Governance and Accountability of Canadian Crown Corporations Reform or Transformation, that the pressure to rethink how arm's-length organizations work comes from a number of areas. So it might come from control issues, so that government wants to control, by a renewed push for accountability and transparency in public bodies, or a refinement of corporate governance, a sense that aspect of the organization has not been working well. And O'Coin points out that, in fact, these three pressures are not congruent. They don't actually push the decision-making all in the same way. But when I read this article, I really thought, well, in our case, I think there is an issue here around control, that there's a sense that, well, we don't know, actually, because we're not privy to the review. We have no idea what happened during the review process. And that lack of transparency is not just an issue for us. It's an issue for everyone. Like, it's an issue for all Nova Scotians. Another example of how the issue of arm's length organizations was dealt with in Manitoba. In 2000s, they undertook a review of their arm's length organizations, their agency boards and commissions, and then they actually implemented a guiding law in 2017 to guide decision-making around arm's length organizations. So I guess what I'm saying is that, this particular issue on the art gallery, the other bills that we're going to look at where there was theoretically some kind of review done, we don't know what that is. There is no transparency, and I think that's really shameful, actually. And I think to finish, I would just comment as well on and reiterate the words of my colleague from Dartmouth North, that art should be political, but it should not be politicized. And so, there's probably lots of folks who are actually not watching Ledge TV tonight, and perhaps are not glued. I don't want to assume that, and are perhaps not glued to the legislative process in Nova Scotia, but I'm going to tell you that when there is a controversial art exhibit and the minister shuts it down, people will pay attention. And that's not what we want for art, not in Nova Scotia, not anywhere. And I think it shows a distinct lack of trust in the board and in the artists that we have in our province to politicize the governance of the Nova Scotia Art Gallery. And with that, Madam Chair, I will take my seat.